the Faculty of Humanities, Universitas Indonesia. Second, we will hear an opening remark from Professor Antonia Soriente. And after that, we will have the public lecture from Professor Roberto Tottoli, the Rector of University of Naples Orientale. He will give a presentation about research on Qur'an in Europe, which will be followed by a question and answer session. Following to that, we will hear the public lecture from Professor Francesca Bellino from Department of Human and Social Sciences. She will give a presentation about Arabic encyclopedic activities during Ottoman period. And that also will be followed by a question and answer session. Now, before we start with our first agenda, let us watch the safety induction video of this auditorium. Now, we will first hear the opening remarks from the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Bondan Kanumoyoso.
Good morning, distinguished guests. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is an honor for us on this occasion to welcome special guests who are present in this morning public lecture. Professor Roberto Tottoli, Rector of University of Naples, Oriental, Italy. Professor Francesca Bellino from the Department of Human and Social Sciences, University of Naples, Italy, and also Professor Antonia Soriente, FIB UI teaching staff and students, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say thank you very much to all of you for attending the public lecture that held by Faculty of Humanities, University of Indonesia. Two important topics that will be delivered this morning are research on Qur'an in Europe by Professor Roberto Tottoli and Arabic encyclopedic activities during the Ottoman period by Professor Francesca Bellino. The study of the Qur'an is not only a concern of Muslims, but also among non-Muslim scholars. Since centuries ago, study of the Qur'an has begun with various motives such as political, social, and intellectual. European Islamic experts are working intensively on various themes that are not limited to the study of interpretation, but also text, history, periodization, translation, compilation, codicology, printing, and even the established center study for Qur'an and Islam. In the field of Arabic literature, the European Orientalists in Muslim-majority countries began their studies by examining the work and manuscripts of ancient Arab intellectuals and poets, which were hidden and even invisible from the eyes of the Eastern people themselves. Several Orientalists translated many books from Arabic into other languages and wrote important books on Arabic literature. The printing and publishing of these manuscripts and work written by Orientalists is credited with making research methods easier for contemporary Arab writers and scholars. In addition, the scientific studies of some Orientalists are considered as model for writers and researchers in Arabic countries because of their accuracy and regularity in various genres and fields of literary history. The study of the Qur'an in the Western world already has reached the golden age and covered various fields of study. There has been collaboration between Muslim and non-Muslim scholars in studying Islam and Qur'an. The collaboration became easier with the presence of several Muslim scholars living and teaching in Western countries. A prime example of this collaboration is the publication of the Encyclopedia of the Qur'an in 5 volumes edited by J.D. McAuliffe, in which non-Muslim scholars as well as Muslim scholars discuss method, concept, phrases, and also some interpretation of various themes in the Qur'an. In 2007, published an important reference on the Qur'an in French entitled Dictionary du Qur'an, which was written by several French scholars. These 2 books will surely become important reference books on the study of Islam. All of this development collaboration increasing our hope that in the future there will be scientific cooperation between Indonesia and Italian researchers in the field of Islam and Qur'an studies, especially researchers from the Faculty of Humanities of the University of Indonesia and the University of Naples Oriental. We hope that this cooperation will develop further in other fields within the scope of humanities. On this occasion, we would like to express our high appreciation to Professor Roberto Tottoli and Professor Francesca Bellino for sharing their knowledge for all of us who are present in this morning public lecture. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for the welcome speech from the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Universitas Indonesia. For the next session, we will listen to an opening remark from Professor Antonia Soriente from Department of Asian, African, and Mediterranean Studies, University of Naples, Oriental.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I should thank the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities of Universitas Indonesia, Pak Bondan. Thank you very much for this very nice opportunity. Sandy, the Manager for Research, and Bastian from the Department of Arabic Studies. I'm here representing University of Naples Orientale in my capacity as a professor at the university. I'm professor of Indonesian language and literature at the University of Naples Orientale, and in my capacity as responsible for the international relations with Indonesian institutions. This is the lecture. Is actually one of the examples of the long relations that our university has with the Universitas Indonesia. I am a good example of these relations because I came to Indonesia in 1991 to study Indonesian as a foreign language, and then soon after I did my master's studies in linguistics here, and I finished in 1995. I finished my master's. I did research on dialectology of some languages of Borneo. I don't know whether there are any of my former teachers here. And I then also studied, I actually taught Italian language for a certain time in the faculty, in our faculty. And then I continued with my academic career. I took my can you hear me? Yeah. When I went back to Italy about 20 years ago, I started teaching Indonesian language and literature, and I developed a lot of relations with Indonesian institutions, but Universitas Indonesia was actually the very first of this beginning. And since then, we have started having periodic exchanges with Universitas Indonesia, meaning that we had some PhD students doing very short courses at our university. We have now 3 students in the Fakultas Ilmu Budaya studying here. I see here Guglielmo. There should be 2 more, Sarah and Thea. Oh, I don't see them. Oh, there is Thea. I don't know where Sarah is. Well, if Sarah is. So I'm here. I'm very happy actually to see that these exchanges actually are being fruitful. We had this year a program of Erasmus+. We have applied, we have opened applications, actually application are over. But students from Universitas Indonesia have applied for an Erasmus+ exchange. Professor Maneke Budiman is going to be our exchange professor for a week, 10 days in the university. This is very important. I mean, the idea of having this kind of exchanges so far have been always in the field of Indonesian studies, but since several years ago, we thought it was very important that we expand our relations in other fields. And for this reason, I thought it would be a good opportunity if one of the expertise of the in-depth research that we do at Orientale University about Islamic studies could actually be a way to trigger exchanges and joint research with Universitas Indonesia colleagues. Another good example of these exchanges is a joint research project that we've had for the last 3 years in the field of maritime archaeology with Professor Chiara Zazzaro, who was actually a visiting scholar as well here 3 years ago, I think. We are carrying out a very interesting project on traditional boat building in Sulawesi, but also on in a couple of archaeological sites, studying maritime traditions here. So again, as I said, it's very important that occasions like these are not only institutional. I mean, the visit of our rector is not a way to have a meeting about institution, but it's also a way to strengthen our academic relations, our scientific relations, and I hope that with this experience we can actually strengthen another line of research in our university. Our university is very much, especially our department, the department I belong to, is actually specialized in the study of Asian, African and Mediterranean studies, but as you can see we have scholars like Professor Bellino, who comes from the Department of Social Sciences, where actually you can carry out also this kind of research in the field of humanities. So we are very happy actually that this year we have 3 students. We are doing the selections now, and I really hope that 1 or 2 can come from Universitas Indonesia and they can experience studying with us in the next semester. As I said, I've got now 3 students from our department studying here, but 2 more will come. Will be coming next semester, and I'm very glad. And actually, I have to thank the whole infrastructure of Universitas Indonesia, also at the level of international relations, that actually facilitate all the process for visa and for applications and so on and so forth. I think I should stop here. This was just a way to remind us that the intention, the very important objective is actually to develop joint research and collaboration among institutions, and for us, Universitas Indonesia is actually the first and probably one of the most important institutions with which we want to continue to have very solid interaction and exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Antonio Soriente, for the opening remark. We'd also like to welcome our Vice Dean for Academic Research and Student Affairs, Dr. Untung Juwono, in this auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to our main agenda, that is the lecture from our speakers from the University of Naples, Orientale, Italy. And in this session, the first one, we'll have Professor Roberto Tottoli, the Rector of University of Naples, Orientale, who will deliver his lecture. He will be delivering his lecture on research on Qur'an in Europe, but we will wait for the moderator first, Professor. And in the second session, we will have Professor Francesca Bellino from Department of Human and Social Sciences, University of Naples, Orientale. And she will be delivering her presentation on Arabic encyclopedic activities during Ottoman period. This session will be led by Mr. Bastian Zuliano, PhD, as the moderator. Please allow me to give short introduction about our moderator, Mr. Bastian is here. Please have a seat first, Bastian. Bastian Zuliano, MA PhD, was born in Valencia, PAP. He holds a Master of Arts degree in 2009 in the field of Persian language and literature at the University of Tehran, Iran. He is now the head of Arabic Studies program at Faculty of Humanities, Universitas, Indonesia. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bastian Zuliano to lead the session.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, good morning ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bastian and I'm going to be moderator of public lecture today. Today we have very interesting public lecture with the main topic Islamic studies, and we also have two wonderful speakers who are already with us. Professor Roberto Tottoli. Welcome, Professor Roberto Tottoli. And also we have the second speaker, Professor Francesca Bellino. Welcome, Professor. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get this public lecture for the next an hour. And for information, our audience here are faculties, researchers, also students from the various fields. I will show you the student of Arabic Studies. Raise your hand. Oh, most of them, majority. And also we have students from philosophy. Raise your hand. Philosophy students. We have also story students. Okay, welcome all of you. Engineering medical medicine. Okay. In this public lecture is divided into sessions, and the first session the speaker, the Professor Roberto, will talk about 20 minutes, and after the speaker has presented their topic, we will have a discussion about 10 minutes. And all the audience can ask a question by raising your hand and during the discussion session. Ladies and gentlemen, moving along to the first session, please welcome Professor Roberto Tottoli.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Vice Rector, to the Dean of the Faculty. I must start stating that it's a double honor for me to be here, first of all as Rector of Orientale, with such an important university in Indonesia, with which, as my colleague Antonio Sorrente just stated, we have so strong relations, and we have also some of our students studying here, and it's a particular honor for me to be here for them. The second fact, yes,
ladies and gentlemen, before we start the first speaker, allow me to read the profile of Professor Roberto Tottoli. Professor Roberto Tottoli, BA in Oriental Languages and Literature at Venezia, February 1988, PhD at Napoli Orientale 1996. He studied at FIB University in Jerusalem under the direction of M.D. Kester 1993 to 94, and then taught in Turin 1999 to 2002, and Naples Orientale since 2002, where he has been full professor in Islamic studies where he has been full professor in Islamic studies since 2011 and Rector since November 2020. He has been visiting researcher, professor at Princeton University 2014, Harvard University 2015, EHESS Paris 2016, Institute for Advanced Study Tokyo to 2018, University of Pennsylvania 2019, and member of the Institute for the Advanced Study in Princeton in 2016 to 17. Since 2019, he has been PL in the European project ERC Synergy EUQU, the European Qur'an. CPL Mercedes Garcia, Madrid, PL is John Tolan, Nancy Jadlock, Canterbury. He is also member of Accademia dei Lincei, the Italian National Academy. He has carried out research on biblical prophets in Islam, biblical prophets in the Islamic tradition, 1999, with English translation, 2002. He has dealt with Islamic literature in general, and more recently with edition and translation of the Qur'an in the modern age. He also has translated several texts of Islamic literature into Italian, such as Al-Muwatta ibn Malik. Wow.
Yes, maybe you can cut a little bit because it took, my biography took away 2 or 3 minutes of my speech.
This is what the volume said?
Yes, yes.
Al-Muwatta ibn Malik, with which he won the King Abdullah ibn Abdul Aziz International Award for translation. And his dated work on Islam.
But I think it's enough. Now you can go searching the internet, and if you have time, you can read it. Everything is too much, as my wife always tells me. No, thank you very much. I was saying that it is a double honor, because not only as a rector, but also as a scholar in Islamic studies. Having the possibility to come here, first of all as a rector, but also as a scholar in Islamic studies, working in Europe, in Italy, visiting so many countries, but never Indonesia. That actually is the biggest Islamic country, so much interesting. I read some book about the development of Islam and Muslims in Indonesia, and so it is quite exciting for me to be here. So thank you for this possibility to share with you some of my recent research. The topic I chose for this public lecture is actually about the history of the presence of the Qur'an in Europe. As you know, Europe, and particularly Italy, share with the Islamic world the border of the Mediterranean Sea. And this has been a border including something like a barrier, confrontation, warfare, religious polemics, but also interrelations of every kind, exchange, cultural or commercial, but after all, interaction and a way to enhance reciprocal knowledge. In this centuries-long history of connections, there is a very specific chapter, and it is the circulation, translation, and uses of the Qur'an in Europe by Christian Europeans, and how the Qur'an, such as a forbidden fluid, was considered dangerous, even kept away from readers, but also acquired in manuscripts, read with great difficulty by scholars of Arabic, and how it was translated and even printed in Arabic in Europe before the Muslim world. This is something like a story of the efforts of many Europeans from the Middle Ages to modern age times to know better Islam and Muslims. As you know, the main fruit of this centuries-long activity was, as the Dean of Humanities told you, the history of Oriental studies in Europe and in the Western world, which from the 19th century produced a lot of scholarship about the Quran, and which in the last 40 years somehow have enhanced so many studies of the Quran on very specific fields related to the Quran. The origin of the Quran, the circulation of materials and manuscripts, first interpretation of the Quran, the history of tafsir and Quranic exegesis and so on. I will talk you about this specific chapter in this history in relation to the decision of the European Commission through its Research Council to finance a 6-year project to carry out research in this realm, and in particular in the history of the Quran in Europe. It's quite interesting that at this moment now, European Commission for Research has financed 4 different projects about the Quran. One project by Holger Zellentin, a young scholar in Germany, about the origin of the Quran and the connection with late antiquity environment. A project about in Oxford by Nikolai Sinahi about Quran exegesis. Our project about the history of the circulation of the Quran in medieval and modern age Europe, and one by Johanna Pink, still in Germany, in Freiburg, dedicated to contemporary translations in Muslim world, ranging from Turkey, Morocco, and reaching Indonesia. She's also an expert in Indonesian translation of the Quran. So I'm proud to be here in this great Muslim country as one of the principal investigators of this project about the European Quran, to show how research in Islamic studies in Europe is also including now a reflection about old attitudes, and how a project like this could help rethink the role, maybe a little role, but still one, the Quran had in the history of Europe, in the beyond the polemic attitude which was and is the most evident surface relation between Europe and Islam. This project, titled the European Quran, is a project belonging to the line of ERC synergy projects, financed $10 million for a 6-year period, from 2019 and 2025. So I and we, all the group of scholars, are in the middle of it, something more than the middle of this project. And this project, like every synergy project, is linked to involve the coordination and cooperation between various research units. To investigate the presence of the history of the Quran in pre-contemporary Europe, we have collected different scholars who combine complementary expertise in the fields of intellectual, cultural, and religious history. I mean philology, Arabic, Latin, the European languages, codicology, theology, and polemics. Slide number 1. You can see here the name of these scholars, also mentioned during my presentation in my biography. Mercedes Garcia-Renal from the Research Council in Spain is the chief PI, has worked on Muslim minorities in Western Europe in Spain. So he's an expert about, you know, in Iberian Peninsula, Muslims and Arabs lived there for almost 1,000 years. So it was an important channel of communication and knowledge about Islam inside Europe. John Tolan, an American Middle Ages scholar, historian, based in Nantes, he has worked mainly about the medieval perceptions of Muhammad, of Muslims in the European history and literature. Ian Loeb actually is instead an expert of 16th, 17th century in Europe, so coming to modern age period in the history of Europe, and has worked a lot about Orientalists and scholars of Arabic and Semitic languages in 16th and 17th century. And I, as the fourth of these researchers, I worked on leading translation of the Quran in early modern Catholic Europe, and I dealt for most of my career with Arabic Quranic traditions and tafsir. We have also other associated teams, Gerard Wiegers in the University of Amsterdam, Candida Ferrero in the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona, and over so many collections. And now together in these 4 centers we have collected almost 35 PhD scholars, postdoc scholars, who are based in Madrid, Barcelona, Nantes, Amsterdam, Naples, Copenhagen. This is something like an interdisciplinary team ranging from historians of Middle Ages, modern time, scholars in Islamic studies, scholars in Semitic studies, scholars of the history of Oriental studies in Europe. And the combination of this interdisciplinary team and the nature of our research somehow is the meaning of connecting various expertises to be able to reconstruct the knowledge of the Quran and Islam in Europe from the Middle Ages to the 19th century. And the date of the beginning of the 19th century was really pointing to the origin of the so-called scientific Orientalism in Europe. Why do propose and why the European Commission financed a topic such as this? Somebody can ask himself or herself. I believe that the Commission selecting it was convinced by the challenge of trying to find the presence of the Quran in the history of Europe in a time when immigration and people movements are bringing to Europe millions of Muslims. It is as such a historical research with many political sensitive points, and as such it is a groundbreaking effort to rewrite, as far as it is possible, the history of the relation between Europe and Islam beyond post-colonial sensitivities and reciprocal knowledge. Things are in this realm more complicated than it is usually thought if we go back to the history of Europe in relation to the Quran. Let me give you an example involving European intellectual history and American contemporary scene. This is an example displaying how things are complex and how also in relation to the Quran there is a centuries-long history which is in many cases ignored. Slide number 2. You see here the first Muslim to be elected to the United States Congress, the Democratic representative from Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who was sworn in not without controversies in American Congress. As is the custom, public servants are allowed to place their hand on the Bible while moving to do their duty. Since Ellison was a convert to Islam, he asked if he could use the Quran rather than the Bible, and he was allowed to use no less than the personal copy of the Quran in English translation that once belonged to President Thomas Jefferson. This use of the Quran caused considerable controversies. One famous author and pundit, Dennis Prager, declared in editorial that America, not Keith Ellison, decides what book a congressman takes his oath on. Prager's views found so many circulation, also connected to the rumors about US President Barack Obama, who had similarly sworn on the Quran, and so on and so on. But Jefferson Quran is significant because it is a product of a complex European story. Jefferson Quran was a 1764 printing of an English translation by George Sale, produced in 1734. It contains reference to Christian readers of the Quran that reached back far into the past, even as far as 16th century Iberia. In his prologue, Sale refers as one to his sources, directly Juan Andres, a Spanish Morisco Greek Muslim from Játiva in Valencia, a convert from Islam to Christianity, an author of a book titled Confusion or Confutation of the Mahometan Sect. He also refers to Mohammed Ramadan and Morisco Ezali in Muslim Tunisia. Somehow it recalls back his translation to the history of the diffusion of the Quran and knowledge of Muslims in Europe since the 16th century. And Said prefaced his translation with an introductory discourse in which he presented Islam as reformed, pure monotheism, free of the doctrinal accretion and semi-pagan practices which he affirmed tainted Christianity, and mainly he was thinking about Catholic Christianity. So somehow he gave a positive judgment of the Quran as a way to polemicize with Catholic Christianity of South Europe. This particular incident by which I have begun illustrates various things, not only the long trajectory of the Quran in European and American cultures, as attested by the said example, but also the way in which this presence sparks controversy thanks to misinformation that deliberately exploits ideological differences. It also reveals the enormous symbolic power of the Bible and conversely also the Quran in the perception of the contemporary times, and in this somehow sacred behavior like bowing before becoming a congressman in a contemporary parliament. Next slide. So the aim of the project I'm presenting to you today is also to challenge this misinterpreted perception. What we propose is precisely a project that will increase and improve our knowledge of the role of the Quran played in the formation of European culture, religion, scholarship and politics. The UQ project examines the place of the Quran in European culture, particularly but not exclusively in scholarly circles, between the 12th and the 18th century. The two dates, as I mentioned before, are not chosen by chance. 1142 was the time when the first translation of the Quran into Latin was produced in Europe, and the second date is when the so-called scientific Orientalist was born and started to move the first steps. Slide number 4. It will also fundamentally change the way academics and larger European public perceive the construction of European religious identities. The European Quran will show how the Quran, rather than just being a tool to question Islam, has always provoked questions about the history of Christianity, historicity of religions in general, in particular the historicity of sacred scriptures. It has been exploited in arguments about the Crusades, Ottoman expansions, European colonialism, and all PhD students and scholars work on specific points in relation to these. As I said, European colonialism, decolonization, immigration, but most especially it is served as a polemical tool in the confessionally fragmented European landscape and has been the Quran deeply entangled in European religious, political and cultural conflicts and debates. To be able to do this, our project will produce, after a 6-year period, a mapped database, first of all, of European Quran, containing extensive information about Quran manuscripts circulating in Europe from the Middle Ages, and printed edition in Arabic, Greek, Latin, European vernaculars produced between the 12th and the 19th century, as well as many data about the principal actors involved in these endeavors, copies, translators, publishers. Slide number 5. You can see here an example of one of the data. We have already collected more than 1,000 entries. This will be something like a searchable database in connection to the major database collecting Oriental materials in Europe, where every European literature in Latin and then in European languages touching or mentioning the Quran is listed, so I have a comprehensive picture of how the Quran was quoted during European history. The Qurans were translated and printed in Arabic and in translation, often using Muslim exegesis and Arabic grammars and dictionaries published in Europe. And the Qurans which Muslim minorities living in Europe lands copied, interpreted and translated into local vernaculars and are preserved in many libraries, not only in Europe but all over the world, often in Arabic script, as well known in case of Arabic written in over characters, something like the Al-Khamiado in Muslim Spain. Slide number 6. You can see here another data collection that about a printed edition. So many books from the 16th century were published in relation to the Quran, and or at least mentioning the Quran for many years. Our approach to our database involves novel methodologies. All data management is in common access to all team members and to all the major databases relating to religious studies. The European Quran team has completed the data, as I said, for more than 1,000 entries. Second point is a series of publications, PhDs, monographs written by postdocs and PIs, special issues of academic journals, and animated digital publication for a wider audience and educational uses. Slide number 7. You can see here this series published by De Gruyter in Berlin. The first book of the series, the Latin Quran, appeared in 2021. The second, the Iberian Quran, about the history of the circulation of the Quran in Muslim and after the Muslim presence Iberian peninsulas. The Iberian Quran has just appeared, and the next publication will be an introduction of mine to Quranic studies in Western scholarship, and a book dedicated to the Quran in Rome, how the Quran was collected in Vatican libraries, how it was translated, and how Catholics in Italy and in Europe, in particular in Rome, especially in the 17th centuries, worked on the Quran for many reasons. Third, a major exhibition during the final year of the project, the European Quran, to be held online and at a number of renowned museums in Europe. In the Vatican Library, for instance, in Vienna National Museum, in Madrid, Casa Arabe. Many other projects involving public education along with this exhibition and engagement, educational production for school and summer school for young students and scholars. The project somehow is changing in various directions some European public scene. Political anti-Islamic Europeans, but also pro-Muslim positions stating that we are documenting a chapter of history with many preconceptions and rivalries. Somehow we faced a lot of criticism coming, I would say, from anti-Islamic positions, even from pro-Islamic positions, asking what is worth to rediscuss these old polemical attitudes. But as we know, as scholars and as historians, I think there is nothing bad to recall past histories. We have now finished the first half of this project, and from this experience I can say that this work till now has brought to light these new aspects and data emerging from various areas which I'd like to call to your attention, to underline how approach to the study of the Quran in Europe is taking shape in these last years in this project, but also in the other project financed by the European Commission in relation to the Quran. First, we are realizing in these 3 years the profound and deep impact of confessionalization on early modern European culture. And when I say early modern, I think about 16th and 17th century, before contemporary times. We can now define in a better way through our work on the Quran how this confessionalization was central in the definition of European identity. Even from the perspective of a study of the Quran in Europe, for most of the early modern period, the theological tension in Western and Central Europe did not primarily pivot on Christianity versus Islam or against Islam, but rather on the confessional rift between Christian churches and different sects one each other. All these Christian sects used to quote or cite the Quran rather than attacking Quran and Muslim, to attack the other Christian sect, saying you are similar or to the Quran, so I'm attacking you, present you, or affirming my belief is still attested in the Quran, so it is older than the belief of the other Christians. The Quran often played a role as an instrument of interconfessional doctrinal debates. It became significant, surprisingly perhaps for modern contemporary observers, in early modern debates on church history, exegesis, and other contested topics in post-Reformation European Christianity. I mean post-Reformation and when Christianity in Europe broke between Reformed churches and Catholics. Second, a further important and understudied topic in which we are now involved in is the role played by European Muslims Muslims from Iberia circulating in Europe, teaching Arabic, teaching about Muslims, and to this should be also added the role played by Oriental Christians, Maronites, for instance, in Rome, coming from Syria, Lebanon, and becoming something like informants of knowledge on Islam and Muslims. But new data are also emerging from the most significant areas we are covering the project and even discovering during our research. Slide number 8. I think we are opening many insights in various realms. We are, for instance, discovering Arabic and Arabic codicology connected to the manuscript present and used in the history of Europe, and how the features of the material influenced the knowledge of Islam, of the Quran in Europe. The circulation and usage of Arabic Quran and its interpretative tradition, and how it was printed first in Europe. The first printing of the Quran is in 16th century in Italy, 3 centuries before printing in movable type in Muslim countries, and how important were the translation of the Quran in all European languages, including Latin and knowledge in Al-Hamiado, the history of Arabic scholarship and Orientalism in different parts of Europe. And it is amazing, for instance, to discover how many scholars in Arabic and Semitic languages aimed to publish the Quran in Arabic, and even copied personally with their hands the Quran directly from the Arabic. And so European interaction with Islamic world from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, how travelers and pilgrims to Muslim countries influenced the circulation of this knowledge. Finally, allow me to give you just a last, before finishing my lecture, one concrete example of the complex presence and influence of the Quran in European history. And I stop then with a specific example after the one of the congressmen. And we go back with the slide number 9, and the last one, to this figure. On October 1553, at the order of the City Council of Geneva, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake as a heretic atop a pile of his own books for denying the Holy Trinity, a major dogma for Christians. Earlier the same year, Servetus had published his book titled Restitution of Christianity, attacking the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. He gleaned his anti-Trinitarian arguments from, among other sources, his close reading of the Quran. As you know, the absolute monotheism of Islam is reflected in a different vision of the Trinity, as something like idolatry, according to the Quran. Servetus was born and raised in a part of Spain with a dense converted Muslim population, but he did not use a Spanish Quran. The Quran that Servetus read had been translated into Latin by English astronomer Roberto Tottoli in Spain on the behest of Peter the Venerable, so going back to the beginning of the circulation of the Quran in Latin. Quite strange, someone coming from Spain with the possibility to interact with Muslims in Spain and using a Latin translation of 3 centuries before. It is quite interesting that why Robert of Ketton's translation had been published around the same year by the Swiss Protestant humanist Theodor Bibliander in 1543 in Basel, 10 years before the death of Servetus. And this publication had sparked controversy, as was read as a Protestant propaganda against Catholics. Martin Luther, the great opposer of the Pope and the originator of Reformation, intervened in the favor of this translation, also writing a preface to the translation, as stating that this was the best way to go against Muslims, to publish their books and to argue with them in polemics. For Bibliander, the edition of the Quran was an attempt to understand Islam based on authentic Arabic sources. At the same time, for Bibliander, as for Luther, the Quran could also be useful as a polemical tool against the Catholic Church. Yet, perhaps the unease provoked by the publication was well-founded. It took only a decade for one reader, Servetus, to use the Quran to attack one of the fundamental doctrines of European Christianity. I think this is a little example among many which attest that surely polemic was the main force moving in medieval and modern age times Europeans to face Muslims and Islam. But at the same time, there was much more. Not only the translation of scientific and philosophical works from Arabic into Latin created a relation, but also the Qur'an was a factor in the evolutions of Europe. This project and a new perception of the history of the Qur'an in Europe started from this idea, maintaining and underlying what is coming to light, that it is only a confirmation to this, but also that, as usual, the history and cultural and religious relation is a complex affair. In the history of human relations, such as in this specific topic, it appears that beyond polemics and opposition, there is also an interest and even a fascination of the supposed adversary and competitor. In this realm, the history of the presence of the Qur'an in Europe in its multiple forms attests of this and can constitute a present and future factor of confrontation, dialogue, and reciprocal appreciation of a centuries-long history which was not only made by warfare and opposition, but also by reciprocal interaction. Thank you.
Thank you for excellent presentation, Professor Roberto. In your presentation, I have a highlight. You have as a leader project for the Qur'an, the Euro Qur'an, and it's financed about 10 million euro for 6 years.
Yes.
It's a history from the middle of age in
Middle Ages, yes.
And I heard about the Michael, who is the first birth in the on the
Michael Servetus.
Michael Servetus, because in Islam we say because of bid'ah, right? Take the Trinity.
Yes.
In Islam also we have bid'ah and like he did.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your excellent presentation. Now it's time for your participation. The audience, the first session we have maybe 3 persons to ask the question. And please raise your hand and identify yourself or question. From right side, middle side,
Left side.
left side. Left side. First, second, and third. Okay. Go ahead for the first person.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Professor Roberto, for the opportunity, and Mr. Bastian. I have a question. How the public and the intellect, or academics, or scholars... Okay, sorry, I'm sorry. I'm Ikvi Kanzan Ilahia. Ikvi,
Yes.
from Arabic Studies. Okay, so the question is, how the public and the intellect, or academics, or scholars responded to the spread of the Qur'an, specifically in Italy. Thank you.
You mean now or in the history?
Now.
Now, when the European Commission announced this financial... how you want? Okay. The questions.
The second question, the second person. Please.
Okay, thank you for the chance. First, I want to ask is, in the first study of Islam in Europe, did Christian scholars initially think that Islam was related or evolved from the Arianism, which became a heresy in Christianity? Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Indah from literature. I would like to ask about in Indonesia. What I know about Islamic studies is there are two groups that is called as conservative and liberal for the study of Islam itself. What about in Europe? If it is for the one who is liberal, they are quite permissive in studying about Islam and its modernity. And the conservative, it's less permissive. What do you think about it? And what about in Europe also? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 persons and 2 questions, and you have 5 minutes to answer the professor. Please.
As regards the first question, when the European Commission approved the financial plan of our project, and the project was selected, there were some social platforms, some polemics about why European Commission is putting millions of euros trying to demonstrate that the Qur'an has a role in the history of Europe. But actually it was not a long line of polemical interventions. As you know, because Italian journals had published these, and for some time, for a few days, it became known to a wider public. There were some, I would say, conservative, anti-Islamic attitudes, but were not so many. I think I and also the PIs were quite happy about these reactions. So, because I mean, we wanted just to touch that sensitive point. We are sure that the Quran was not a major actor in the history of Europe, but it was a supporting actor, and we want to demonstrate this. So there were some reaction also by some scholars. For instance, we received the relations about the scholars who had made peer reviews, and there were 8 of them were very positive, enthusiastic, and one of them, it was absolutely against it. I'm also a scholar I know very well, a Catholic priest, saying, no, this is not useful to do. So I think we are very happy, which is a sensitive point. Apparently, it's also touching sensitive points all over Europe. I would say, for instance, that now we are facing the problem that it is not possible to bring the exhibition to British Library in Northern Europe, because they say the display of this polemical literature is somehow challenging the contemporary Muslims living there. It is absolute that probably we are going to bring the exhibition to Tunisia and Morocco, in Muslim countries, without problem. Displaying this is all the old attitude. But along with the polemic, there is much more, the desire to know the other and so on. And this is acceptable in Muslim countries, but not in Northern Europe, because, I mean, Western museum curators are afraid to solicit the attention by Muslim minorities. For the second point about origin of Islam in relation to Arianism, yes, you have also this line. But it must be said that around the origin of Islam in relation to late antique environments, you have an amazing literature taking different lines. So in relation to Judaism, to various Christian sects, and also Arianism, in relation to Iranian religions and so on. It is actually, it is now something like a specific research sector to discuss about the environment where the Prophet Muhammad emerged and the revelation of the Quran occurred. One line, it goes in the direction of Arianism, but along with 20, 30 different lines. The more recent trend in this field of the last 10 years is to underline the close relation between the environment of Muhammad and Syriac literature, also displaying attitudes of Christian sects and so on. This is the more recent attention. When I studied in this field 30 years ago, the supposed close relation to Jewish tradition was the fashion of that time. Now it's different, at least in Western scholarship. As regards the last question about the difference between somehow liberal and conservative Islam. You have to understand that in countries like Italy or Europe, you have maybe not more than 10 of teaching about Islamic studies, where Islamic studies are mainly historically connected to something like a teaching about history, describing various trends and so on, emerging from Muslim countries, and also, for instance, I give you my experience, displaying something like 2 courses, an undergraduate, which is a general introduction covering from the emergence of Muhammad to contemporary trends in 1 semester. So it's very general and displaying the various attitudes. But inside this, and then you have a postgraduate, which is something more specific, translating the Arabic text and commenting and so on for fewer students. When you come to a personal involvement and judgment, if you think about if there are in European academies somehow people maintaining one position or the other, you have to go outside Italy, for instance in Germany, where you have theological faculties which are trying to prompt something like a vision of moderate Islam, something like a political action, to involve the collaboration of Muslims in something which you can call something like a modern Islam and so on, and trying to somehow counteract conservative different positions. You have this in those European countries that somehow try to institutionalize teachings about Islam. In Germany you have now 4 faculties of Islamic theology taking this path. In Italy you have in the last year some accords by universities, for instance, with some Moroccan institutions to build courses to train ulamas in Italy and so on. You have a growing tendency also to orientate the research mainly in North America, but now also in Europe, when you have a growing access to academies in teaching in Islamic studies of Muslims. In many major universities in North America and also in some places in Britain and so on, you have a number of Muslim scholars which are mainly coming from modern Islam, but you have also some conservative attitudes in some teachings in universities, sometimes where you have chair paid by Saudi Arabia or Emirates and so on, but they are still a small component, much larger in North America, where you have Muslims trained in American universities and who are not, even if they are Muslim, they are not so different from non-Muslim Western approaches in European and American universities.
Thank you for the answer, Professor Roberto. I think we just finished for the first session. Or any question maybe from the audience? The last one. From the person. From the Mr. Fuad. Mr. Fuad. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Muhammad Fuad. I used to be in the English department, and I'm teaching at the English studies. I think there are many very interesting issues that the speaker raised. I'm so interested in, if you allow me, 2 questions. One is about, I'm a student of ethics also, and I've been reading some of Tariq Ramadan's books. So, and as far as I understand him, he's trying to formulate an ethical system, Islamic ethical system, so based on the Quran and on the tradition. So now, and you mentioned Servetus,
yes,
who has used the Quran to to develop a criticism of Christian theology. Now, although that's a very long time ago, my question is, I wonder if among European scholars of Qur'an, people who are interested in developing sort of cultural critique, criticism. Yes. So, Servetus developed a criticism of Christian theology based on the Quran. So my question is there a development in European today of European scholars who are interested in developing a kind of cultural criticism or moral criticism towards European culture, for example, based on the Quran? Is there something like that, or do you think there's even a possibility of that? I mentioned Tariq Ramadan because he was just trying to develop that kind of thing, although he directed his discourse to Muslims, but he's trying to develop a sort of something that he claims as a universal, ethical Islamic ethic that probably can be useful for non-Muslims also. Probably that's a long question, so probably let me finish with that one first. Thank you.
The last question, sorry.
Good afternoon. Buongiorno, Professor Roberto. Thank you very much for your time. So, my question is, as far as I know, that the European identity is really related to the Christianity identity. And my question is, how was the Quran circulation during the medieval age then affecting the modern European identity? I mean, in the sense of the ethics or in the sense of attitude, and is there any also relation between the Quran circulation in the medieval age that affecting the theology of the Christianity itself? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last question, I'm sorry. It's okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Al-Firdaus. Hal tastati takalam lughat al-Arabiyyah. Aywa. Syukran jazakallah. Syukran jazakallah. I'm sorry. Uridu sa'as'aluka yani anil madar yani al-Islam.
Masmuk ya Rima.
Oh, Al-Firdaus. Ismi Al-Firdaus. Sadiki min Pak Suranto. I'm sorry. Thank you. Syukran jazakallah. Al-awal, kaifa ra'yuka al-an al-Islamu fi Eropa yuhibbuna an-nasu yuhibbuna al-Islam. Kaifa ra'yuka? Maksudnya tuh gimana pendapat Anda selain itu tentang perkembangan Eropa yang begitu luar biasa saat ini dengan Islam? Kaifa ra'yuka al-an fi Eropa yuhibbun nas al-Islam fi Eropa laisa fil buldan akhar, bukan di negara lain kalau bahasa kita. Yang kedua, asani hal hafizta minal Qur'an. Afwan. Ini pertanyaan bukan untuk membuat Mr. Prof itu ibaratnya itu terintimidasi, tidak. Biasanya seorang yang meneliti itu akan hafal Quran. Kam hafizta minal Quran awil ayat aw surah. As-su'al tsani wa su'al salis al-ikhlas wa al-ikhlas la ba'sa bihi qul huwallahu ahad. Atau inna apa yang kau kausar lah sabi. Two question. Syukran. Two question. Thank you very much Prof. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
First of all, I don't know the Quran by heart. And I go back to a question if people in Europe love the Quran, debate the Quran, answering also to the first question about the efforts by Tariq Ramadan and the circulation and use of the Quran to criticize and to interact with the European scene and the diffusion of the Quran today, the people approach the Quran. In general terms, something like in contemporary public, I would say that somehow you have a small but a growing trend of conversions of European to Islam. So you have a specific, even if reduced interest, but I would say that you do not have the use of the Quran, something like in the inner European thought criticism. It's not something, it's quite interesting that if Servetus was mentioning that along with many other things, he also found attestation against the Trinity in the Quran. As far as I know, it's not one common topic to rely upon the Quran, but mostly related that it's something like a secularized activity when you have to interact, to discuss cultural facts and so on. You don't go back to the Bible in the public scene, and you don't go back to the Quran in this relation. Something different is happening inside the religious communities, and so sometimes you still find maybe on Christianity sites and so on an attitude of criticism against the Quran. On the major facts we know, the contents in relation to jihad, the status of women and so on. So you have, I would say, something in a more or less secularized situation in European countries, something like a double attitude. You have an effort of appreciation of the Quran, a tiny but growing number of conversion to Islam happening all over Western world, Europe and United States. You have something like a majority sensibility of people who know almost nothing about Muslims and Islam. They start to know now with the presence of Muslims and so on. And you have maybe also something like a tiny, a small attitude, still polemic, coming from religious circles, Christian circles, but not only. You have also something like not religious attitude to be afraid by the presence of religious community and Muslim communities in Europe. So I cannot say that in general Europe now loves somehow the presence of the Quran more in the past, but absolutely Islam is an actor today in the situation now. So you have more sympathetic attitudes than in the past, but this project shows somehow how also in the past you have these lines of attention. What we discuss in the project from the Middle Ages and modern age times is actually an affair of a few people, few scholars. It is not something like a common perceptions. But on the other side, it's quite interesting that you see not only scholars but also common people trying to acquire Qurans, to sell manuscripts of the Qurans, for instance, to Italy, rich noble families. So you have this combined attitude. It's not so different than today. An average general public who do not know so well the contents of the Quran of Islam, a critical, polemical attitude, and then a sympathetic, very interested, and over minority attitude, which go back absolutely to the Middle Ages and modern ages, where the circulation of these complex attitudes were really the interest of a few people, few scholars, but in a situation where the common relation to Muslim world were probably more present than today. Until the Ottoman Empire, at least in Europe, the confrontation was very active. With the Balkans, acquisition of materials, knowledge, prisoners on one side, the other side, circulation of people who had experience in Muslim world by Europeans and in European world by Muslims, was absolutely, we always think about Middle Ages and modern ages as a period with less connection than today. It's not true. It's not true. You had the circulation, but this history of new consideration, appreciation, somehow of the role of the Quran goes back to the attitude of a minority of people. scholars, and so on. Yes, I would say that the situation is not so different than today.
Okay, thank you very much for Professor Roberto Tottoli, who represented and enlightened us about the history of Qur'an from the medieval age in Europe to contemporary today. And you have also the project, and will be finished in 2025. 2 years, next year, and it will finish. 3 years. And success for your project, and we are waiting for the final project and the work of your project. Thank you. Thank you for Professor Dr.